You might not know it, but one of the most influential leaders of the American labor movement at the turn of the 20th century was a woman in her 60s. Known as Mother Jones, yes, the magazine is named after her. She fought for workers across the country, including miners and textile workers and steel workers, demonstrating the power of labor. Unions have ebbed and flowed over the past century, but we are currently seeing a resurgence from nurses to teachers to Starbucks and Google and Amazon employees to rail workers. Today's railroad workers are facing a similar battle. They currently face penalties for taking time off, even for an emergency. And labor groups say that workers have been fired for going to routine doctor's appointments or family funerals. They had threatened to strike starting on Friday, which would have had a disastrous impact on the economy, costing $2 billion a day. But a tentative deal has been reached to avoid that strike. Employees will, for the first time, be able to take unpaid time off for medical care. They'll also get a 24% wage increase. This deal came together thanks to the direct involvement of Joe Biden, who ran for president the way he's always run for senator, as pro-labor and pro-union. The Washington Post reports that he was personally involved in the talks, calling into the negotiations and growing animated in recent days over the lack of scheduling flexibility for workers, expressing a mixture of confusion and anger that management was refusing to budge on that point. And joining me now is the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. And great to see you, Secretary Pete. And this is very, very good news for these workers. I know that Marty Walsh, the Labor Secretary, and yourself were involved in these negotiations, too. How did this team and how did President Biden help to get the two sides together? And what are the contours of the deal?
Well, you're right. We were deeply involved. The president was personally engaged. Secretary Marty Walsh convened the parties at the Department of Labor for the final stretch of negotiations. I was on the phone constantly. So was Secretary Vilsack, Agriculture Secretary, because, of course, resolving this is so important to American farmers. And I really believe it was the direct intervention of the president, as well as all the other things the administration did, that helped move this toward a deal before it was too late. The outlines of the deal include a significant pay increase for workers, about 24% cumulatively, but also, as you mentioned, very important quality of life concessions that were very important for the unions and that they won at this bargaining table. You know, one thing that we're seeing really across the transportation sector is an attention not just to compensation, but to quality of life issues. You've got essential workers who don't have the kind of normal schedules that so many American workers can count on, don't have the flexibility that a lot of us would take for granted. And whether we're talking about flight attendants, whether we're talking about truck drivers, whether we're talking about these union rail workers, they are focusing on that. And I think that was one of the key things that needed to be resolved in order to get to this deal that is now good news for workers, I think good news for railroads in general, and of course, very good news for the American economy that we didn't face a shutdown.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting. We were talking about this earlier when we were talking about doing this segment and talking about on the team call, is that, you know, it really does make a difference. And I know that you are a lover of history, such as myself. I will class you as a fellow nerd. And, you know, it depends. There's a lot that depends in these historical moments on who the president is, right? When it was Ronald Reagan, it was bust the unions. That was the idea with the air traffic control union. When it's the civil rights movement, it mattered that it was Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson who were open. And so a lot of people were like, don't march on them with the March on Washington. And it's like, no, that's who you march on, because those people are actually willing to talk. What kind of a difference do you think it made that Biden, President Biden, does have this history of being a pro-union guy and a trains guy? Because the trains guy thing seems like it's important too.
That's right. You got a president who is passionate about making sure we have excellent rail in America, and a president who is proud to be the most pro-labor, pro-union president that we have had in modern times, perhaps ever. And I think that led to a lot of credibility, especially when he was making these calls like last night around 9 in the evening, as the talks were already going into probably their 12th hour or so, calling on the parties to get to that solution and find that deal space. I think he's earned a lot of trust and a lot of credibility, and it comes from the heart. We saw it also yesterday when we were with United Auto Workers at the Detroit Auto Show. For him, the technology that's happening, the electric vehicle revolution, this is all about doing it in a way that makes sure workers can win. Today, we were celebrating the administration's Buy Clean initiative. I was in Detroit along with the soon-to-be National Climate Advisor in the White House, Ali Zaidi, and our General Services Administrator, Robin Carnahan, with steelworkers. And they have have participated in what's called the Blue-Green Alliance, a pro-climate labor movement that is insisting that we break this old idea that there's a choice between climate action or good jobs, and instead make sure that we're creating good-paying union jobs through what we do on climate. So it's really a through line through everything we're doing in the administration that I think served the president of the administration well in terms of credibility at this absolutely critical juncture for our economy that we went through last night and into the wee hours of this morning, but also is something that's part of what we're doing every single day.
And we know that this is a tentative deal. Is there a definitive date when this thing is solid? Like, what is the timeline for it to go from being a tentative deal to a deal?
So that plays out over the next few weeks as it goes to the members for ratification. But what I'll say is that as that process plays out, you now have a deal that has the backing of the unions that fought so hard for these concessions and these improvements, and the railroad companies that were at the table negotiating this, and of course the administration and a lot of others who are eager to see this succeed. So we'll follow that process closely. But again, just so thankful for everybody who got us to this point, and I'm thankful and proud to serve under the leadership of a president who was willing to roll up his sleeves and get directly, personally involved to get this thing over the finish line.
I have one question. It's related, but it's not exactly in the same thing, the same exact vein. One of the things that the president has talked about in terms of the initiatives to get more electric out, he was at the Detroit Auto Show talking about and getting in electric vehicles and that sort of thing. What's the timeline on rolling out more help for those of us who do have a hybrid or an electric vehicle? Because charging stations are kind of few and far between, and it's kind of hard to push that initiative if you can't charge the thing. So what is the timeline on getting more of that kind of infrastructure out, and what's the jobs picture going to look like for that?
Well, that's right. We need to get to where you can count on finding charging stations just as easily as you can a gas station when you're going on a road trip. The good news is there are a lot of opportunities to charge at home or charge at work for some Americans, which of course you can't do when you're filling up with a gas car. But a lot of folks living in multifamily dwellings, especially in lower income neighborhoods where it's not yet profitable for companies to put in those chargers, we're going to have to take steps to make sure those are available. And the same thing to make sure we have that full national network. This week, we actually announced a big step on this. Ahead of schedule, we were able to clear 35 of the states so far that have come to us with the plans for how they're going to use this new federal funding through the president's infrastructure package to deploy those chargers. The president's vision is 500,000 chargers by the end of this decade across the country. And we know that won't happen on its own. We're working and partnering with the states to make it happen, and that'll make it more convenient and accessible for everybody to take advantage of these EVs.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, I'm going to have you come back because I want to talk to you about electric buses and mass transit, but we'll have to do that. We'll have to do that another time. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here tonight.